Everyone's a Democrat until they pay taxes.
Gen Z millennials feel like they're doing worse.
I mean, it is worse. The TikTok ban, will it kill the influencer?
Maybe it should.
Like, you think you're addicted to your phone. It's way worse when that is your job.
Yeah, that sucks. What's going to be the biggest struggle for the Gen Zers?
Over access to information. Here's
Right.
the top 10 ways to get out of debt.
You have to make more money. Hello, Erin, officially. I always do like an actual intro.
Sure.
So we don't have to do that now, but I'm excited that you came on. Once I saw it, because I think I reached out to you and then I didn't hear anything back and I was like, dang, she's too busy. And then you hit up my assistant or something. I was like, yes, because I haven't talked to you in so many years. And you're like one of my favorite people to talk to. And I was like, dang. And then I felt bad because I was like, I haven't reached out to Erin to like just talk in a while. So anyway, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Also, I don't know about you, but I feel like the years between like 2020 and 2022 just like don't count in timelines of things.
They don't.
We just subtract them from time that has passed.
Yeah. Every single guest that I've had on the podcast so far, I realize it's been like 3 years since I've talked to them and it doesn't feel like that long. But yeah, it's just that whatever happened in the pandemic time wise, like that was very strange. And then there's also like, I feel like during the pandemic, like I felt like the personal finance industry or just especially like the FinCon stuff, like I feel like there was that big fracture that happened. And then is like people left FinCon, like that community, like completely. And like, I didn't really know how I felt about any of that stuff. So like, I kind of backed away from that. And I backed away from like social media and all. I thought that everything got super toxic very quickly. And I was like, I didn't like it. But I feel like that's when I kind of lost touch with a lot of, I don't know, just a lot of people that we used to hang out with. So those were weird times. You're probably not doing any more FinCon stuff ever again, right? If I had to guess.
Probably not, but also, I mean, it definitely was a wonderful thing that served a great purpose for a period of my life. But even before, I would say in the 2019 FinCon, I remember going and kind of looking around and feeling like this isn't for me anymore. And I don't mean that in any sort of a disparaging way. It just had really kind of pivoted. I felt like it had gone a little bit more towards affiliate marketing and just marketing in general. And it wasn't in alignment with what I felt was valuable for me and what I was trying to do professionally. So that was probably going to be my last year anyway. Yeah. And particularly, I mean, I live in New York City, which means a lot of people tend to just come through here at various points in time. So, and or already live up here. So I get a fair amount of access still to the personal finance world. I didn't necessarily need an annual conference to be like, oh, I get to see all of my friends.
Yeah. I feel like there was just like a very special period of time. Well, I got into this stuff in like 2015. I felt like when I came in, it was like from like 2015 to 2018-ish. I felt like it was a really like special, cool like time. And I met a lot of really great people. Like you introduced me to like almost everybody that I knew at the time in the personal finance industry. And it doesn't feel that way to me anymore either. I went to FinCon with my employees this last time, and it was like it was fun, but it definitely has changed a lot and it's grown a lot. And I think that like writ large, like the personal finance industry has changed. It seems to me like it has changed a ton. And so I was curious about, because like I feel like you've always been very connected, and like especially on the personal finance media side, like you write for like major publications and you're an author and all these things. Like, and what do you think has changed in personal finance in the last couple of years?
TikTok.
I think so too.
That's the short answer.
Yeah.
Which notably also, I'm hearing a siren right now. I'm so sorry for everyone listening that you will likely get ambient New York City background noise during this. But I would say primarily TikTok and the rise of finfluencers, which is not TikTok specific, but I feel like really did catapult people into new levels in terms of reach and access.
Yeah.
And for anyone who might be listening who isn't familiar with the term, a finfluencer is a financial influencer.
Yeah.
We just love to smash words together. So that was certainly happening pre-TikTok. I actually wrote an article about this recently for Bloomberg where, like, to be clear, I was finfluencing before TikTok even existed. We just were doing it on different platforms. TikTok had just really kind of opened up a whole new one demographic to be reaching out to, primarily Gen Z, and now kind of on their heels, Gen Alpha. But also on the flip side, it changed the way content was being created.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who likes long form, who likes nuance, who likes digging into the shades of gray, who likes not being super prescriptive to the point where it's like, here's 3 ways to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
I like me like, here's a bunch of options depending on what is going to work best for you and your financial journey. TikTok was never going to be my platform.
Yeah. I hate TikTok.
So do I.
I don't like to use the platform. And I know I sound old like saying that, but like it drives me nuts the way that it just starts playing when you turn it on. It's like, it feels so like anxiety producing to me. I mean, I've done some content on there. I think what I'm realizing though is that like there a lot of like the blog stuff still works. Like just for Millennial Money Man and Stellar Media Group, which is what owns Millennial Money Man now. The bulk of our traffic comes from Google. We're getting traction on YouTube, but like, I haven't wanted to dive into the TikTok stuff at all because the same thing. I like nuanced conversations. That's why I want to do like a longer form podcast, because I think that there's so much lost in like just the short form stuff. And I've been talking to my team about this a lot. I don't have like super strong opinions on a lot of things, which is kind of difficult because like, if you want to have like good sound bites for short form, you got to have these like I think you've got to have really strong opinions about certain aspects of personal finance. And I'm kind of just like, I just want to help people make more money and like people can kind of do whatever they want. And I think that doesn't play very well on the short form stuff.
It doesn't, as someone who does have a lot of very strong opinions, and famously I write for Bloomberg Opinion.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people say your stuff would do very well on TikTok. I also know it would do well because I see certain influencers steal my content and post it as their own. So, and that does perform well. And it is, which is also just for me, listen, we were dealing with it in blogging, which feels like years and years and years ago. Content theft is always and has always been and will always be a thing. But it is, to me, particularly infuriating seeing it happen on TikTok and Instagram Reels and all of that, just because you in real time as the viewer can see the person getting the benefit, where with blogs, we weren't seeing people's analytics.
Right.
We were maybe seeing an amount of comments or maybe seeing if it was shared a lot on RIP Twitter. Yeah, but there wasn't the same feedback loop. And that to me is very interesting, where you can see if 100,000, 500,000, 1 million people have liked or shared something that maybe wasn't that content creator's idea.
Yeah. You're going to have to tell me off camera who that is, because I'm very curious.
There's more than one offender, which is also the really fun part of this.
Dang. Yeah, that sucks. I haven't experienced that, fortunately.
And
but
the thing that's hard in personal finance, there's a finite number of things to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Like we all know there's only so many things in so many ways. The problem is language. Like when people are taking pretty much verbatim things that you have said and not crediting you,
that's
that
not cool.
is where the problem arises.
Yeah, that sucks. Is it somebody like that I would know? Probably. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll talk about it after. Yeah, I haven't dealt with that, but one of the things that because I know that you read, I was kind of doing some like research on just like things you've been writing about and stuff. And I noticed that you had written recently about TikTok and like the TikTok ban and stuff. And I've noticed that there's all those studies that have come out about like, or maybe not studies, but like kind of anecdotal stuff about kids now want to be influencers more than they want to be like doctors or lawyers and stuff like that. And one thing that I do know, or I feel about creating the short form content and being a quote unquote influencer, I think it kind of sucks. Like it's not as fun of a job as people think. Especially when you get into the grind of it, like where you have to keep creating content for people to keep watching. And there's so much, it's so easy to like people lose interest so quickly now. Have you felt the same way? Is that one of the reasons that you haven't like dived into just like being like a TikTok influencer?
I'm so tired. And I think that's a big part of it. This is my 11th year of being quote unquote broke millennial. And yeah, I'm exhausted of that part of the grind. There are elements of it that I still really love, writing being one of them, but also being able to move into more interesting conversations to me, which is, for instance, writing opinion pieces compared to just writing prescriptive listicles of here's the
Right.
top 10 ways to get out of debt. That is no longer interesting to me. And it hasn't been for years at this point. And I did say in that piece for Bloomberg, it was basically saying the TikTok ban, like, will it kill the influencer? Maybe it should, is sort of my takeaway.
Yeah.
And I said, first of all, it's not. They would just move to a different platform. If TikTok truly were to get banned in the United States, we're just going to see a migration either over back to Instagram or to something new.
Yeah.
I just think it's really interesting how easy it looks to be an influencer from the outside. And I feel like there's a better conversation now being had a little bit about the mental health part of it, the burnout part of it, the sheer exhaustion. I also think people need to be really critical thinkers when it comes to this notion of fame. And what does fame look like for you? Do you actually want to be famous? We move through a world now where you get no privacy if you're a known entity. People have cameras and video recorders in their pockets at all time. Like, does that actually sound good to you? Your call. Maybe it does. But
I don't think so.
Part of what influencing is like is I feel equating people wanting to be influencers now is like equating kids who wanted to be NFL or NBA stars when we were kids. And I was like, yeah, that's cute. Probably not achievable for most people. It looks to people like being an influencer is super achievable and easy. Just like an incredible athlete, you're not seeing all of the work that they are putting into doing that job.
Yeah.
And then also the potential downsides outside of maybe somebody getting, tackled too hard and breaking something on the field. But it is hard to explain to someone who's never experienced it what it's like to be so indoctrinated by the dopamine rush of posting something, checking, is it performing? If it's not performing, oh my gosh, why is it not performing? I got to take it down. I got to put something else up. It's exhausting. It's constant. It's hard to turn off. Like, you think you're addicted to your phone generally, just as a person in the world. It's way worse when that is your job.
Yeah. I think it's super unhealthy. I don't think that humans are designed to take in that amount of feedback and like just, I don't know. So when you see people go viral, like I've kind of seen this trend of like people start getting pissed off about the negative, like they get hate comments a lot. And then you start to see that kind of like venom start coming out in their content. And that's what I've noticed that a lot about like the personal finance or the influencer, like it's not like, I don't feel like they're putting out like good vibes into the world, which is kind of like a hippie thing to say, but like, it just feels like you have to, one, you're like battling with people all the time that are talking crap about you. And then also it's a really great way to get more engagement. If you have these like super hot takes on things and you like trash other people. And I've seen a lot of that too. And I don't like that. I feel like that is something that has changed in the personal finance industry quite a bit.
And it's what performs well, right? Like people grabbing the comments that were a really negative thing about the previous video that they posted, and then they're doing a response video where they're stitching with somebody else. Like those have gotten so hot and popular. And I would say 85% of them are pretty toxic. Yeah. Some of them, there are people who can do a nuanced version really well. I haven't noticed it in personal finance specifically. I feel like it's maybe in other industries, but who are more having a dialogue back of, I see why this person said this. I'm going to further clarify the point that I was making. Here's why I still feel this way. Yeah. That's almost like having a debate, just in a really weird back and forth, not in real time version. Yeah. That I don't have a problem with. And listen, I am somebody who writes hot takes on the internet for a major media outlet with a demographic that doesn't necessarily look like me. Right. So I get plenty of emails with people disagreeing with me. I don't respond to most of them, first of all. And some of them actually have interesting points. Mm-hmm. but it's rare. Like most of the time, it's just I've hit somebody's trigger for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Like about maybe a year and a half ago, I wrote an article that was basically stop telling people you'll just figure it out when it comes to having kids. People should be thinking about how much kids cost, how they're going to afford them, what that's going to look like, particularly in the United States where we have so few social structures that are actually going to provide parents support. That needs to be part of the equation. You can imagine the feedback that I dare say.
How dare you talk about that?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, but I've always felt like you do a good job of like, you've got like hot takes on things, or I don't even say hot takes. Like you've got strong opinions about things that you believe, but I feel like I've always felt very comfortable having like difficult topic conversations with you. Like I remember we were talking about the Me Too movement, like last time I saw you, I think in New York. And most of the time I'm afraid to have those conversations with people because I don't think that everybody, like I'm genuinely just curious about some of this stuff sometimes. And so when I see like new things come out that people are, like either upset about or they feel very strongly about, like, I just want to know more about it. And I feel like that nuance has gone away in our society where it's like, you can't just have like an open conversation where it's like, you're not going to like try to cancel me and I'm not going to get mad at you and we can figure things out. I feel like you've always done a really good job of that. And I don't know that that is the case in a lot of the personal finance industry these days.
Well, I appreciate that because to me, it's like the highest praise one can receive. And I agree. I mean, I feel like a lot of it, particularly when it comes to writing content or making content for social media, you're not listening, you're just playing defense. So you're thinking as soon as somebody is responding to you, even if it's just you reading comments, you're thinking about your rebuttal as opposed to actually taking in what the other person is saying, which is part of why it's different than having perhaps a nuanced conversation in a venue that is not a public forum where people feel safe to voice opinions. And it is exhausting to me how quickly we get siloed and put into bubbles thanks to mostly the algorithms and whatnot on the internet. And people just end up in echo chambers where either everybody agrees with them or the algorithm is just trying to trigger them for whatever reason.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. And I think, I feel like I'm hoping that like that kind of changes over time because I feel like people are craving more of a conversation about like being able to have a back and forth. So maybe it'll kind of swing back the other way. But I'm curious to go back to kind of what you're doing. So you're writing for Bloomberg right now, and you've written for like big publications since I've known you. Like you've been doing that for a long time. So, but you told me kind of like off camera, I'm just going to say like that you're kind of like looking to maybe the next thing. So can you talk about that a little bit? Because I don't actually know many people that are, I'm guessing you're talking about like maybe getting away from the personal finance space completely. I don't know many people that have done that. So I'm like curious, like what you're hoping to do or what the plan is, or maybe not the plan, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I mean, I would love to have a plan. I don't. And for me right now, it is that, like I mentioned, I've been quote unquote broke millennial is my brand. And I have been playing this, at this point, kind of feels like a character for 11 years. I started in January of 2013, 11 years. And part of what's hard, and a lot of people have dealt with this side of things, when you start a brand or a business or an online identity at a phase of your life where it is relevant to you and it is your truth at that phase, but then it gets traction and gets big and your life changes, but it doesn't. That's really hard. Like it is, obviously, I feel it's deeply inauthentic for me to call myself broke millennial. I am very much not a broke millennial anymore. I certainly was when I started the blog, but my life has changed dramatically. I have 3 books and a workbook that I've written that's part of the Broke Millennial series. I've done so much work. I've just had a ton of opportunities. My life has progressed. I am married now. I still live in New York City, but just a lot has changed. And it's time for that side of my life to change too. I think for me, part of what is so refreshing writing for Bloomberg is that I'm not playing that kind of a quote unquote character. I'm not getting introduced places as like Erin Lowry of Broke Millennial. It's just I'm Erin Lowry, opinion writer. And I talk about personal finance, but it's not in a prescriptive or listicle or that kind of a way.
Yeah.
For me, the part of personal finance that still really lights me up and that I find fascinating correlates with my third book, which is having awkward financial conversations. I do think it is fascinating to talk about how people talk about money and to also give guidance about how to navigate awkward conversations. So, how to talk to your parents about having a will and an estate plan, how to get financially naked with your partner, how to set financial boundaries with your friends or coworkers, how to ask a coworker how much they make, how to negotiate. Like there is just an endless amount of content to me in those realms. But again, that doesn't necessarily lend itself to what is currently popular in terms of getting information out. Sure, I could do 1-minute TikToks or Instagram reels. It's like, here's how to have a conversation. Here's a script. Yeah, that's great. That's less interesting to me. Digging into the nuance is interesting to me. So I don't have an answer on what a pivot will look like. I do think if I am going to stay in personal finance, it will be more in the how to navigate conversations as opposed to here's how to build a budget. Here's how to fix your credit score. That's all really important. Right. I've already written that content. Go buy my first book. Like, I don't need to keep talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel you. Like when I first started out, I was writing a lot about student loans because I had paid off my student loan debt. And so like that to me was like the big thing. And now at this point in my life, like I don't really like talking about student loans at all. And I really don't even enjoy talking about like debt payoff because I don't feel like I have anything like new to add to that conversation. And I feel like over the years, I've really like kind of trended more toward, I love talking about entrepreneurship and I like helping people get started in that path. Cause I think it's a great way to, I mean, there's a lot of downsides to it, but it's like a great way to like get ahead quickly. And the more I've kind of looked at how the money in general is like how people interact with money, they're all feeling inflation now. Like, I feel like the only real way to actually get ahead is just you have to make more money. Like, I think that if you because I think about this all the time. Like, you think about like Dave Ramsey or Ramit or like, whoever, name any personal finance influencer, they're all business owners and they're telling people how to manage their money that are not business owners. But it's like, if you look at what they're actually doing instead of what they're saying, they're building audiences and selling products and getting sponsorship deals and they're getting wealthy that way. And so I feel like I like talking about that more because I'm like, that's like the real way to get ahead. I feel like, or maybe not the only way. I mean, certainly you can move up through your career and make great money and all of that, but like it all kind of comes down to like making more money. So I don't know where I was really going with that other than like, I don't like talking about student loans anymore, and like, I just don't enjoy it.
Yeah, but you found another thing that interested you within what you were doing. And I think that that's a natural part of the progression. And to tie also back to the finfluencer conversation or just influencing in general, that is to me what becomes short-sighted about becoming an influencer is you are usually yoking yourself to a period of your life or a shtick of some sort that might not grow with you. It's pretty rare that it does. And if you are able to make it grow with you, then great. Good for you. But that is so uncommon. And it is beautiful if you have the foresight to figure out how to create something that can grow with you. But as you sort of phase out of that period, it's really, really hard to figure out what's next. And within entrepreneurship too, I think what's very interesting, it's hard. Like a lot of people who are out there promoting like, oh, we can all be millionaires and you can work for yourself. I was like, well, we all can't. Like that is just unfortunately not how the world works. We literally can't all be doing this thing.
It's true. Yeah, it's true.
But in addition to that, it's also okay. And I talk about this a lot too. If you want a paycheck, if you want to be able to go in and exchange your time for money and walk out and be done, great. There are some people for whom that is the ideal path. And you don't have to deal with the headache of all the legal logistics, all the tax logistics, all of the HR logistics. I mean, heck, I'm a company of one and it is exhausting.
Yeah.
I look at people like you who have employees. I'm like, oh my God, why and how? How did you do that? That's so tiring.
It is exhausting. You know what's funny about it? I actually have found that that's what I enjoy the most. And I'm sure I feel like this is going to change because like I like the puzzle part of figuring out how to like grow a team and like scale a company and all of that. But to really quickly go back to your point about like entrepreneurship and that we can't all be entrepreneurs, I very much agree with that. A lot of entrepreneurship really sucks. Like I would say I was very unhappy when I was a teacher, but there have been times as an entrepreneur that I have been far more stressed out and far more depressed. And like, it's a really difficult, lonely path. And that's actually why I started hiring people, because I didn't want to be like so lonely anymore. I like wanted some people to like, I felt like I realized I needed that, especially like, and you probably experienced this too. Like I went from interacting with a lot of people in person every day with my teaching job. And then I quit and did like the solo blogger thing, which I thought was like the dream life. And I sat around in coffee shops and like just like did whatever I wanted every day. And I got incredibly depressed. Like it was awful. Like it's not anywhere as cool as you would think it is. And that's why I see all these people that want to do like the fire movement people that want to retire early and like just sit around and do nothing because they think that's cool. It's not that cool. It's not that much fun. And so I that's why I've gone down the path that I've gone down. But like definitely entrepreneurship is really hard, whether it's one person or multiple. And like, that's just, it sucks. So are you in your kind of like next jump? Are you wanting to not do entrepreneurship anymore?
Well, the way I describe it, it's hard to have been a cowboy for this long and have to go back. I can't really imagine truly long-term going back into an office environment. I feel like that would be really fun to me for about 6 months.
Yeah.
And then I'd be like, I'm sorry, I have to go to what inane meeting? I have to do what ridiculous thing that's a waste of my time? That part of stuff, I'm not sure that I have the temperament for anymore. Having to fix my face that often when people are saying things or asking things of me that I'm like, that's stupid. I just can't. It would take a lot of retraining myself to go back into the traditional workforce. But also on your loneliness point, I remember was it like maybe summer of 2021 when we first started having the conversation about like, oh, a remote worker is going to go back into the office. And I made a prediction at that point. I said, listen, as somebody who was working alone for years prior to that being a zeitgeisty thing, I give it 5 to 7 years before people are like, oh, you have an office I can go into? Oh my gosh, that's great. Mm-hmm. I want to go back into an office. And I say that just because there's something to be said about the human interaction that you get with like silly water cooler talk and having somebody to like ad hoc go out to lunch with on occasion. And social interaction is really important. And I feel like as adults, we're kind of forgetting that.
Oh yeah, I 100%. I halfway joke with my team all the time about like having a physical location, and like sometimes I do it just to kind of test the water because I would love to do it. I think it would be so much fun, and I think we would get so much more shit done so much faster sometimes. Like when you can just actually talk to people and do things. But every time it's like their reaction's kind of like, I don't know, like we'd have to move or whatever. But I feel like it's going to happen eventually. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's because of exactly what you said. Like human interaction is like super important. I think we're wired in like, from an evolution standpoint, like we're supposed to be around other people. And that's every time I see somebody try to do the fire movement or try to work for themselves or whatever, I'm just like, you got to be around people because like you think it's real cool to be by yourself for a long period of time, but you're not going to be happy, but a lot of people don't believe it until it's like one of those, like, I don't believe it until I experience it. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people are probably finding that out right now with remote work.
Well, I also joke with folks who are going to self-employment and planning to work from home. I said, do you have a dog? Because if you don't, you should get a dog. It makes you go outside.
Yep.
Usually other people engage with you. If you have a dog, you just have moments of your day that are about other people and
Yep.
also not work.
Yeah.
So it's just it forces you outside, particularly if you do not have a roommate or a partner that you're living with. You definitely need to have some sort of forced go outside social interaction. Because I remember in my early years of self-employment, I had a friend who also lived in New York City, self-employed, was not living with her partner at the time, did not have a pet. And she's like, there's some days where I go all 24 hours without going outside. I was like, that's not healthy.
No, not at all. Yeah, I think you're right. A dog. Yeah. Like I've definitely having an animal is very helpful. And yeah, you just got to like get to know people and talk to people and get outside. I am curious for you because you're actually, I don't think I've ever asked you about this. Like, because you're doing it, you're self-employed and but you also write for these companies. Like, how does that relationship work? Like, do you become like a part-time employee for Bloomberg, or is it just
contractor?
It's contract.
Mm-hmm.
And do they like, how does the process work for that? Like, do you just get to write whatever you want?
No, I have an editor go through. It's actually in many ways very similar to what it would be like if I were physically in the office, which sometimes I've gone into their office a few times. There's other jobs that I do that totally depends. Like I do one where I expert edit. So I'm not the in-house editor. I am the kind of, let me make sure that factually all this information is actually correct. I'm not checking for grammar and syntax and all of that. I'm the like money expert who's coming in and reading these articles and then like giving my stamp of approval. That it depends every month how many articles they release, how much I have the bandwidth to pick up. That one is also based on, I have an hourly rate, and how much time it takes me to edit is how much I get paid. So it's not like, oh, you get X amount every time you edit an article. It just depends. All of these things, though, I am a contractor. Technically, because I am now an S corporation, it's not even me that's the contractor.
Right,
It's, they technically are in agreement with my company, and then I am an employee of my company, which sometimes is very stressful for in-house people to set up correctly. And my accountant gets very upset when I get 1099s. He's like, you're not supposed to be getting 1099s from other companies.
Right.
That's a whole different thing. Just another fun quirk also. And then in addition, other ways that I earn income, speaking engagements, which obviously ebb and flow depending on seasons, what's going on. And then I still earn royalties off of my books, which is great. And what else do I do? I mean, that's pretty much it for right now.
Yeah.
I'm kind of in a little bit of a low season.
That's a lot of different things though.
It is.
Do you enjoy, because you've been part of I'd say part of the media in a way, like you've been involved with these, like, do you enjoy that environment? Because I'm curious about, like, there's obviously been like a lot of animosity, I feel like, towards the media in general over the last however many years. And trust is down and all that kind of stuff. Like, is that a feel, like, do people in that industry feel that, or are they like super aware of it, or is it kind of just like whatever, it's, that's overblown?
No, I think media, particularly journalists, are really frustrated because it is kind of the few bad eggs ruin the bunch type situation in some regards. In other regards, it's also, okay, there's a really good podcast episode there's a podcast called Search Engine. And Ezra Klein comes on and is basically talking about like how to fix your relationship to the internet. And part of that, though, is like how to consume media, which he also hates that term, which is kind of funny. And in it, he talks a lot about the death of small and local news and how that has really changed access that we get, that you should have local news, that there should be things that are hyper specific to where you live. And instead, we've gone bigger and bigger and bigger, and also let all of these companies and like VC guys and all sorts of different people come and mess around with how media made money, which changed the structure of the output of what was happening with media. So some chicken and egg dynamic there. It also depends on what you're writing. I am a bit protected and inoculated from some of that criticism just from the fact that I write opinion pieces. It is clear up at the top. This is
Right.
not reported news.
Yeah.
I am not giving you unbiased opinion or unbiased information on anything. I'm giving you deeply biased opinions of what I think. Now,
Yeah.
I try to back it up with XYZ study, XYZ survey, XYZ information. But I've been on the other side of people who design surveys. Those are also usually deeply flawed and designed to agree with whatever the hypothesis was. I do feel we are in a new era of having to redefine media literacy, thanks in part to AI, also thanks in part to things like TikTok, that anyone can have a voice, anyone can be giving out information. Particularly in personal finance, that can be really dangerous. The number of people who are saying this investment or this way of structuring your business, some of which I'm like, I'm pretty sure the IRS would come for you if you did this particular thing. And you think you found a hack, pretty sure the IRS is going to disagree.
Yeah, I see a lot of that stuff where it's just like wildly wrong. Like,
Yeah.
It's not even close. Like super dangerous. Like don't do that.
And people, all of us, I think, need to relearn how to vet, particularly as AI continues to rise and create content. And how are we going to differentiate between what is quote unquote legitimate and real and what is fabricated? I do not have an answer to that.
Yeah.
But that's what I think is probably making most people in media a little nervous right now.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's just a really good example. I'm not going to say the name of the site, but like since AI and ChatGPT in particular has come up so quickly, a lot of I don't know how closely you follow any of the Google updates, algorithms, that kind of stuff, but there are so many sites that have popped up that are just like spam sites. Like they put like AI generated images of people as the editors and the authors, and then they create thousands of pieces of content all at the same time, like instantly. And then they throw it all up the website. And if you're just like you're just casually looking at it and you're Googling something and you find the site, like you'd think like, oh, real people wrote this. And like, this is this person that does this thing. And then it turns out like, it's all fake. There's none of it. And it's like, how do you, I mean, especially in like the media world where you're reporting news, like how do you even navigate that whole mess of like what's real and what's not real? And Google's tried a little bit, like they just put out an update that's a spam update that's taken a bunch of those sites down, but like it's just going to keep going. So like, does your editor ever talk about things like that, or do you like just do you hear about those things often about like how to fight AI?
Well, I am not in the room where those conversations are being had right now. I do feel like for me, as somebody who has been in it for a little while, I feel pretty confident about certain resources that I would turn to, particularly, again, writing about money. It's pretty easy to go to government websites and census data and things like that for information that I'm looking for, as opposed to, oh, just this random site with this random study that has come out. I think it's a lot of that. Obviously, when I'm submitting pieces, my editor is also checking anything that I am citing to make sure that that is also legitimate and credible. There's a bunch of different, checkpoints. I would assume you're going to have some version of an AI fact checker. That's going to be a new job probably in the next 3 years. Like people who are going to have to go in and determine, is this legitimate and credible, or was this faked? I wouldn't even be surprised if that's some sort of college degree here in the next decade, like how to figure out a deep fake. It's going to just be an interesting wild, wild west for a little while.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of scary. It's just that whole thing of like the reality as we know it is kind of in question like a little bit now. And that's one of those things, like we were talking about social media, like I'm not sure that humans are designed to live in that environment where it's like you don't actually know what's real or if anything is real that you're seeing. I just think it's very interesting. Do you get the sense that like, because you're a freelance writer, essentially, like, is there fear about that like industry going away because of AI, or is it more, are you seeing it more as like a tool that people are using to help them create content? Like, what do you see?
I think people are definitely using it as a tool, but I think there's a lot more fear than not. Just because right now it feels like we can outright it, but how long is that going to last?
Yeah, I don't know.
At what point is this going to just become so sophisticated that it can create the kind of content that humans have? And to me, what is deeply sad is that I always sort of ascribe to the belief that humans will always need storytellers. Like that just goes back through our whole history. And that will always be a job. And somebody will always have to be a storyteller. And there was something comforting in that, particularly in an environment that is notoriously underpaid and all these other things. Like, well, at least we'll still have jobs.
Right.
I don't know now.
Yeah.
Hard to know. And even today, I saw headlines. And again, not that I'm Nostradamus, but I did predict this a little while ago in a Bloomberg article that we were going to see trends back to trade schools and vocational schools.
Yeah, 100%.
And apparently in the last year, Gen Z has ticked up heavily with going back to trade and vocational schools. And because, again, it's going to take a lot longer for AI/robotics to reach a level to be able to be doing those jobs. And also, presumably, it will probably take a little longer for humans to trust a robot to do certain jobs compared to a human doing that job. That is the kind of work that's probably going to have a lot more protection for a long period of time.
I would think so. Yeah, I feel like humans are like, maybe this is true. I feel like humans is like kind of find a way. Like, it's kind of incredible that we've like built these cities and like do all this stuff when you think about like thousands of years ago, like where humanity was. So I feel like we're going to figure out a way to navigate all this stuff. And it is happening, like it's happening quickly, but it also happens a little bit slower than I think people, like everybody thought like Google was going to go away instantly and like every job was going to be disrupted. Like I still hire freelance writers. I still have editors. Like I haven't seen that what ChatGPT can do is better than what a person can do because it misses so much nuance. I think it's going to get to a point where maybe it gets that good, but it's still like, I'm going to need somebody to make sure that the stuff that goes up on the website isn't garbage. Like I need like verification, somebody I can like hold accountable for that. So I think that for sure, but to go into the trades and everything, 100%. Like you see that as a huge trend. People are talking about that more now. People are talking about like buying the businesses that boomers started and running those businesses. I think you wrote an article recently about, was it financial dysphoria?
Yeah.
Okay. And I was curious about
dysmorphia, but yes.
Dysmorphia. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't even know what I said. But that concept where Gen Z millennials feel like they're doing worse than they were doing, or that feel like they're doing worse financially than I guess their parents' generation. Mm-hmm. Is it, are we actually doing worse, or is it just a feeling like it actually is worse?
I mean, it is worse. It's worse because cost of goods are so much higher and wages and salaries largely haven't kept up. So the problem also becomes that boomers will say things like, oh, well, by 30, I was 5 years into owning my first house. And hey, mortgage rates were 13% back when I bought my house. And you're like, okay, but yours costs $85,000, which even adjusting for inflation is $100,000 less than the average cost of the same size house today. So these are not comparable things. And in that regard, yeah, we are at a significant disadvantage. They had certainly a few blips with the economy at various stages, but not nearly as significant as what we have dealt with in our early career. Yeah. They are still dealing with them. Like I think sometimes we talk about this as if like boomers don't experience the same major world events that we are all experiencing. Like it still is impacting them. It's impacting a lot of people's ability to retire. But the difference was that the middle class very much still existed for them. And I look at my in-laws as a great example of this, that my father-in-law did not go to college. He went right into what was like what we would call a blue collar job. He worked that job for decades and could comfortably raise a family of 5. They have 3 kids. Very, like, not a whole lot of extras. Owned a house. You know, there's a good public school. The kids went to public school. They got to play the sports. They went to the summer camps. Like, they got to have a comfortable life. The job that he worked right out of, not directly out of high school, but pretty out of high school, you have to have a college degree now to work that same job. And that's what I'm saying, where like the middle class access is really disappearing.
Yeah.
And also, my father-in-law now has worked his way up in this major corporation to working a desk job that he got because of all the experience he had working for decades on the factory floor and working up within that. But even that, like most people who do his job have to have at least a college degree.
Yeah.
And that has really changed. And the cost of a college degree is so high.
Yeah, it's crazy. That is, I don't know. I mean, to go back to your point about like home ownership, like we just went through the home buying process and we sold our first house. And I could have sworn when we built this house in 2018 that I was like, I think we're building this and like buying this home at a terrible time. I was like, I'm pretty sure this is the top of the market and like this is a really bad decision, but we're going to just go with it. And we made a ton of money on our house, but it's so the house, or like our house currently is so expensive. I don't know how first time home buyers are doing this right now. Like houses are crazy expensive and it's like the interest rates are so high. And like in Texas, property taxes are extremely high here. And it's just, people seem to be doing okay, but I don't know how they're doing okay. I guess it's credit card debt for the most part. Like they're just hiding all of it, but it's just, it's just wild to me that people are, it's much harder to buy a home now. I mean, even to like go out to dinner, like it feels like it costs twice what it cost a couple of years ago. Like everything's more expensive. And so I don't know how people are navigating that right now.
Okay. Yes. Cost of homes, credit card debt.
Everything's expensive.
Everything is expensive. And also to tie back to the aforementioned middle class example, I feel like no one can comfortably raise a family of 4 on one income unless you are a high earner.
Yeah.
Therefore, you need childcare, and childcare is heinously expensive too. It is just all of these factors. And I'm not saying they didn't exist when boomers were our age. There were certainly people, particularly depending on where you lived, whether you had access to a family support system, et cetera, that certainly was a problem for some people, but it feels like it has gotten way worse and way more extreme in a very fast amount of time.
Yeah, it definitely does. And it's, to me, it's like, I don't even know a lot of people that want 4 kids. I think we have like one family friend where they're a young couple and they want 4 kids. And like, I know a couple of people my age that maybe have 3 kids, maybe, but like for the most part, like I'm seeing a lot of my friends have 1 kid and like, that's about it. And they're like, yep, I don't want to do any more than that. And I think I mean, God, every single thing, like I was looking at like tacos the other day. There's like a new taco place that opened up and it's like per taco, it's like $10. I was like, how is that? I was like, what is going on? Like, it's just crazy. Gosh. And that's why I've kind of come to this conclusion that like, that's why I feel like I'm just interested in teaching people how to make more money. Cause like, let's say this continues for any amount of time. I don't think it's going to continue like inflation at the same clip, but like, I don't know how you can save your way into anything. I just don't know. It's like, if everything continues to go up and your salaries are not going up, like if you're not fighting for your salary to go up, and changing jobs or making yourself more valuable in the company that you work for, or starting some kind of side job entrepreneurship thing, like, I don't know what you do anymore. And I don't know how like people like Dave Ramsey, like how their system is going to work. Cause I think it's a system that works really well for people paying off debt. I know you have like strong feelings probably about Dave Ramsey, but, I just don't know how that's going to work anymore, where it's just like, yeah, you just save and you'll be fine. You know what I mean?
Well, listen, I never knock his debt payoff strategy with the one exception of you absolutely should be contributing to your retirement account in tandem
Right.
with paying off debt. That's the one area where Dave and I are going to disagree. Specific to his debt payoff strategy, we disagree on a lot of other things. But I mean, all you have to do is listen to his show for 15 minutes to realize just how wildly out of touch he is with
He's
today's reality.
He is like super, super rich. And
He's super rich, but also super backdated to a couple of things. One, a version of the American family that I'm not entirely convinced ever existed, that he thinks that one person, a man, will go to work and make a good living, and the wife will stay at home and take care of everything at home, and no one has to pay for childcare because one person is at home providing all of the childcare and all of the household labor.
Yeah.
And what a waste of your life if you have student loan debt because you're also not using that degree, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, I'm being a little facetious, but so many people, even if that's what you want, even if that is the lifestyle that is most appealing to you, it's really hard to come by these days. It is really hard to be in a dynamic where only one person is earning a living and one person is at home providing all of the support and all of the costs that otherwise people have to outsource. Because even just the cost of housing, the cost of food, again, is so high on top of having to, you know, invest for your own retirement, be setting yourself up for the future. Maybe you have a family member who ends up needing some help, and then that's going to be a new additional cost. Maybe somebody has a health crisis. We live in a society in the United States where, like, oh no, you have a major ailment and your health insurance is subpar or you're uninsured, immediate bankruptcy. You're done. Starting over from zero.
Yeah, that's true.
There's so few safety nets, and I think too, what to me is frustrating about that is you say even that term and it dog whistles socialism to people. I'm like, I'm not anti-capitalist. Trust me. I'm just saying there should also be some baseline social infrastructure for our citizens. So in one of the richest countries in the world, women are not giving birth and expected to go back to work a week or two later.
Yeah, that is wild.
Your insides are falling out.
Yeah. Well, I remember like the first employee I ever hired, she had a kid and I don't know if I feel like it was because she was scared that she was going to get fired. Like, I think that is a dynamic, or I know that that's a dynamic, for women, something they have to worry about. Like, I told her, like, take as much time as you need. Like, it wasn't like a very formal company back then, and it still isn't really to this day, but we didn't have like a policy per se, but I was like, look, I mean, take as much time as you need. And she came back in like a week and I was like, this is way too early for you to be coming back. And she was like, no, I really want to. And I felt really bad about that because it's like, I couldn't tell her. I mean, I guess I could have told her like, you're not going to work, but like, then she would have had probably more anxiety about that, you know? It's a tough thing. And it's just like, I agree with that. I think that there should be more time for that. And I don't think that is a very common family structure. Maybe it is a common family. I don't know. It's like, I feel like I need like some stats to back that up before I just make a statement, but I don't know many people that do that. Like to have one person working.
It certainly does still exist. There are some people for whom that can and does work, but you either live in a really low cost of living area,
right? Yeah.
Or the one person that's working is a really high earner.
Yeah.
It's really hard to have sort of an in-betweener. You know, my husband is a teacher here in New York City, and I will often comment on like, how does anyone support a family, even just of a married couple, on this salary in this city? Like, it is so hard. And the idea of, you know, teaching should be a job where like one person could work and one person could stay home and raise one or two children. That should be a job that is paid enough to support that. And New York City teachers are paid some of the best in the entire country. Like, I'm not even complaining that they're ridiculously underpaid compared to there are teachers in a lot of this country that are heinously underpaid.
Oh, for sure.
They're paid pretty well. could be a lot better.
Yeah.
But the idea of supporting a family with the cost of rent here, with the cost of food, with the cost of transportation, I don't know how people make that work and then still are able to invest for their futures or save in an emergency fund or any of that.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have probably just resigned themselves to the fact that they're never going to retire, which I will say this. I don't know if that's the worst thing in the world, because I think I don't think like retirement age being 65 and like everybody's got that as their goal. Like I think that if you can find something that you love doing, that there's a joy in that. If you can find something you feel productive in society, like it's not gonna be working for some like big corporation where you're like just stuck in a cubicle. But I'm not, it goes back to like my like mini retirement experience, which I didn't retire, but like going from like working in a job to like not doing very much. It sucked. Like it really did. So I think a lot of people that are like, I know my dad specifically, like he could retire, I think like next year or maybe the year after that or something. And he's like, I'm not going to stop working. Cause he was like, if you stop working, you die, which I don't know. That feels like an anecdotal thing that people say. But I wonder if people are just going to work well into their 70s and 80s and just do that, you know?
So my pushback on that is that I think what your dad said is true if you have not created a fulfilling life for yourself outside of work. And again, I do feel like a lot of American society is so work centric.
Yes.
That we don't do a good job of having hobbies, of creating social lives, of having a lot of fulfillment and enrichment outside of our work. Our work is almost designed to fulfill a huge chunk of who we are. And yeah, if that is your whole life and then you just leave, particularly if you leave in a way that your company kind of forces you out,
mm-hmm.
I feel like people legitimately die shortly after. Like you have to retire to something, which to tie back to fire, I feel like is part of both of our feelings about the fire movement. It's like, it's great if you figure out what you're retiring to, which for a lot of people is still some version of work. It's just work on your terms that you enjoy. You're not necessarily having to exchange time for a paycheck. But even if it's something you really love, depending on how labor intensive it is, you just might get to a point where you're prioritizing other things. Like we change so much over our lives too.
We really do. No, and you're right. I am very aware. I have a big blind spot in that specific area because for me, my whole life is my work. Like and I think I don't know why. Maybe it's like I have an obsessive personality about stuff or whatever, but like I wake up and I immediately start working and I love doing it. But I was talking to I'm actually having a Money Shop episode with 2 of my employees tomorrow, and we're going to be talking about fire. And we have it's really interesting to hear how they talk about work. And I mean, they're great employees. Like they do, like they work hard, they do all the stuff, but like, they're not as obsessed with this as I am. And I never would expect them to be, but like, it's just interesting to hear that kind of like, they talk a lot more about their hobbies and like things they like to do outside of work. And I'm like, the only thing I think about is this. Like, and I play golf on Sunday, but that's, like, I'm not going to retire and play golf. So I agree with you. I think that is important to find, probably pretty important to find something else that you would want to do. So like, is that for you? What is that? Like, what are you?
Well, it's funny how you word that because my brain is wired very similarly. And I made a really conscious effort back in 2021, I took like 3 months off, one fully off, like fully in earnest. I got off of social media. I got off of everything, like full month off of nothing. And I downshifted a lot of my work for the other 2 months. And it was also sort of me trying to figure out like, what do I want? Like what? And I've been on this quest for a hot minute.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a tough question.
But I did get certain amounts of clarity coming out of that. But the other thing that I also did was I started pursuing hobbies that I couldn't monetize. that became a really big goal for me. So it's like, I'm going to try something that's going to put me out of my comfort zone and that I genuinely cannot monetize. Or if I did, the price point for a return is so high that no one's going to actually buy this product from me. 2 examples. One, I started crocheting. Like I wanted to be able to make something with my hands. I feel like this also like was sort of born out of the pandemic where everybody started baking. And I was like, I can make one bread. And like, that's about the extent. I'm not a baker. My husband's the baker.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to feel creative. I would love to be able to have like wood shopping, like a woodworking situation. I live in New York. It's kind of hard to do that. Right. There are some places you can go to, but I was like, I need this to be easy at home. So I started teaching myself how to crochet, and it was so satisfying, but also the cost of just buying yarn and making a scarf and the time, I was like, I'd have to charge like $400 for a scarf to remotely receive a return on both the time and the upfront cost of making these things, mostly my time.
Yeah.
But it might cost like $40 in yarn to make an adult scarf. People are probably maybe paying $60. Like I'm just not seeing a return.
Right. Yeah.
That was thing one. Thing two is I took a tap dance class for absolute beginners.
Okay.
Oh, I was so bad. Like so bad.
Yeah.
And what was wonderful about this though, it was designed for absolute beginners. Everybody, I went in, I didn't bring a friend. I went in cold. I didn't know anybody going into that room. The age diversity in the room, youngest people were probably 27, oldest people were 75. Like it was the first time I had been in a space in my adult life that wasn't some sort of like a religious community center type of experience where there was that level of age diversity.
Yeah.
And it was so nice to have access to people older than I am, who especially were like lifelong New Yorkers, had a lot of really interesting advice, had lived a lot of seasons of life, which was very inspiring to me. And also to be like witnessing these 75-year-old women who, one of whom had recently retired, that was just out there living it up, having fun, playing around. And my final push on this is, my parents are kind of phasing into the like, what does retirement look like for us?
Right.
And I have been pushing hard on them about you need to live in a place where you have access to do the things you want to do. Like if you put yourself in a city or town or even state where you have to drive 45 minutes to do the fun thing, well, one, you might get to a point where you can't drive.
Yep.
And so it's nice to have public transit or easy access to cabs or Ubers or whatever we're going to have invented in 15 years. But the other thing is just there is something to be said about living in environments where you have community center access, where there are infrastructures in place for the aging populations. So much focus gets put on young people, but it's really important that we're talking about how people can age not only with dignity, but in a very fulfilling way. That's not just moving to a retirement community in Florida if that's not what sounds good to them.
Yeah, that's actually something I actively try not to think about, like that end part of my life, because I mean anybody who's walked into like a nursing home, like it's really depressing and really sad. So I very much block that out of my mind, and I hope not to have to think about that very often. But
why does that have to look like that is my point.
I don't think it does.
Not all countries are designed that way.
Yeah. It's kind of, what country would you like? What's a good, I don't know much about retirement in other countries.
Well, I think looking at like the aging population, for instance, in Japan is really interesting. One, they tend to be really mobile, like pretty late into their lives, are much healthier as they're aging. And part of that is living in many, many areas of Japan, have access to public transportation. So you get a lot of autonomy for a longer period of time. It's walking. So you're still walking around. I mean, here, I look at New York City is actually an excellent place to retire. The number of people in my neighborhood who are in their 80s or 90s, still doing their own grocery shopping. They have their little carts. They take to the grocery store. You're also in an environment where people are always around. So
Yeah.
I've seen old people fall on the street. The number of people that run to them to make sure they're okay, as opposed to, my grandma lives on 8 acres of land in the middle of Georgia. If she falls and is turtling, no one's going to see her.
Yeah.
So I just got to wear the push alarm thing.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's part of like my perspective on this is just being in Texas where things are more spread out. Like there's the city, but I feel like the cities are more for young people. Like I like, especially like Houston, because Houston's like, there's a lot of developing areas, and like new, young, cool, hip places to live. But everything is very spread out. So like there are tons of the nursing homes around, like just all over the place. And it's sad. It sucks. What was I going to ask you about? I was going to ask you about something related to Frankie. You're going to have to cut this part because I'm blanking on what I was going to ask. To go back to the retirement stuff. So are you trying to get your parents to move to New York? Like, is that the pitch that you're making?
I would love for them to live in Brooklyn. It's about an hour away from my apartment. I kind of tease about that, but no, I do think that New York City offers a lot for like what my parents enjoy and do. My dad has a lot of thoughts about property taxes here, which is fair. I've just been plugged into the matrix here my entire adult life. So I'm like, well, it's all been what I've been paying
Like it
all
is
the
what
time.
it is. Yeah.
So, I do think it would be nice. My parents live in North Carolina. That is far for me. It's an easy flight, but we have a dog that is too big to go on a plane. So we actually drive to Charlotte a lot. It's about 12 hours. It's long, it's far. But, obviously all Americans living to this can empathize with. It's such a big country that even if they moved to the state of New York, but lived in an area that could still be a 6-hour drive. My in-laws live in the state of New York. It's 6 hours from us.
Wow.
And New York's not even that big of a state by comparison to, I don't know, Texas.
Yeah. Right.
So it is, I think that's also such an interesting part of the growing up and the aging around what does it look like if parents do need support and you don't live near your parents? And do they move to you? Do you move to them?
That's an interesting question. And my approach to that so far has been like, I'll be honest, I don't like Houston very much. I've probably told you this before. It's freaking hot here and it's super humid, and like the weather is the big thing that just drives me nuts about this. And it's like, I work online, like I could live anywhere. It's like I'm living in a place that like the weather is awful. But I do like the people here. But more importantly, like my parents live 5 minutes away, and we're moving my mother-in-law in with us. So like, we're definitely like, we've decided to stay here to like consolidate around family, because one thing I am realizing as I get older, like that seems to be the most important thing to me. I used to think like, I want to go live in like California or some beautiful place. And it's like, maybe I do that later in life. I don't care about that as much. I'd rather be close to family more than anything. And so, yeah, I think that it is like, if your parents are listening to this, move to Brooklyn. What are you guys doing? Like get over
and my
there.
sister lives in Brooklyn, so I just have one sibling, and she moved from LA to New York about 3.5 years ago. And so we had lived really far apart from each other for, I think, 12 years prior to her moving here. And yeah, it's a game changer to have her live here. But also now it's 2 versus 2 with our parents. So we can be like, well, we're not moving. So you guys have to come up here.
Yeah. Going back real quick to the yarn thing, it's really funny that you said that. My head of operations, Ariel, she is way into knitting, like way into knitting. And actually at one point, just because of the way my brain's wired, she's been a freelance, like she started as a freelance writer with me. She actually is Michelle Schroeder's sister-in-law.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, she's been working with me forever. And she was at a point where she was like trying to decide if she was going to go like full time. Cause at this time, like I couldn't pay full-time salary. So she was like thinking about getting a full-time job or opening up like a knitting or a yarn store. And I was like, well, that sounds awesome. You should totally do that, because entrepreneurship, just everybody go do that. And the more she talked about it, what she realized was that kind of like what you were touching on was that she didn't, it was one of her favorite things to do in the world. And she didn't want to turn it into something that she had to make money with, because it can take the joy out of like the hobby. And she does classes and stuff now, but she does that to pay for her yarn, because I also did not know how expensive yarn is. It is wildly expensive.
So expensive, especially like the really good stuff.
Yeah, she tells me all the brands
expensive.
and stuff. Because it's funny, we were just talking about this today. So there's a yarn store in Friendswood where I'm moving to. And she was like looking through all the brands. She's like, oh my God, they have the best stuff, like except for the needles or whatever. So it's interesting. I think it goes back to what you were talking about of like, it is important. I don't realize this very often, and I probably should more, but it is important to find things that are not work related to do. Maybe I'll do that someday. I don't know.
To put ourselves in uncomfortable, like you learn through some level of discomfort. Like if we're always comfortable, there's not a whole lot of growth happening in that area. So to just put yourself out of your comfort zone every once in a while. And there's so many ways that can take shape, and they don't have to cost anything. But even if it's as simple as a friend of yours is really into like Settlers of Catan or D&D or whatever, and you might be like, that's not my thing. Why don't you try it? Like, see what you think. Also, makes your brain work in really different ways. I do have a like really good friend who's super into D&D, and it was a college friend of mine, and we did this like big college get together a couple of years ago, and each couple handled a night, and you had to plan an activity and the dinner. And the activity his night is he made all of us play D&D. I had never played. I had my opinions on it that were based on like nerd culture, blah, blah, blah. Which I feel like nerd culture is pretty cool right now, for being honest. But there were certain points where he's like, you're actually really good at this game because you're thinking like very theatrically, which is my baseline. He goes, which is actually like a really fun way to play this. I was like, also, I love theater. Why did I think I wasn't going to like a role-playing game? Like, obviously, this is something I would be into.
It sounds right up your alley, to be honest with you. I did it, and I was I did it one time. My friend was getting married, and for the bachelor party, he wanted to do D&D. And I was like, this sounds super lame. Like, this sounds really lame. And it was okay. It was like, we drank some beers, which I felt like made it a little bit more tolerable for me, because I was like, I'm not pretending to be like some kind of creature. What I can't even remember what the premise was, but like that was a little uncomfortable for me. But I think your point of like finding creative ways to do things with your brain is a good one. And I should probably be trying to do that at some point. But I kind of tell myself that I'll figure that out later after I grow the business to some size that's arbitrary or whatever.
Or just set monthly challenges. That's the other thing that I've tried doing before, where it's like, this month I am going to try this thing. Even if it's just a one-off trying something. Or I have done, for instance, there's a like big community center here in New York that offers classes, like every type of class you can think of is offered there at not that bad of a price. And I recently was like, I've always been interested in learning how to draw. I'm going to take a 5-week drawing for beginners class. It's just 5 weeks every Tuesday. Again, really thought I was going to be better at it than I was going in. Got my ass handed to me in that class, but really learned some interesting things. Also in a way that I can now go to a museum and better appreciate like, yeah, that looks easy. That is insanely difficult to do.
Yeah. I drew a little bit in like high school. I'm not very good at it. I'm curious for you, because I'm still kind of trying to figure out like, what are you going to go into next? Like after the personal finance stuff. And I know you don't know, but are you going to write another book?
I definitely have another book in me. I don't know that it'll be personal finance related.
Okay, that's interesting because I had Grant Sabatier on. God, I don't even know how long ago. And he wrote a personal finance book as well. I think he's writing a second one right now, but I think he said he's going to write one that's like about spirituality or something like totally different. And I think it's interesting. It seems to me like people that are authors seem to like deeply think about a lot of things, which makes sense because they, writing a book, you probably have to deeply think about a whole lot of things. But it seems like they are wanting to change out of whatever the first thing that they wrote about and trying to do something different. So is that kind of the route that you feel like you're going to take, where there's something else that's interesting you'd like to write about?
Yeah. So there is definitely a topic that I have an idea of a book that wouldn't be prescriptive, but would be more, I would describe as like an anthology series highlighting a lot of different experiences, because there are certain things I feel like we experience in life that are spoken about or viewed through a particular lens as though this is a mono experience. Everybody is having the same version of an experience. And then you get into this version of this particular experience and realize like, oh, literally different for everyone. And we don't talk about it that way. And that is not helpful. And it's also like we're withholding information, like we're gatekeeping information from people that maybe could be really informative and helpful for them. And why are we not talking about this more? And also it's different for this group of people than this group of people. Like those kind of things I find deeply fascinating. So anything that can lead to me having really long, deep conversations with folks that I can then transcribe into kind of a story, so interesting. And also on kind of this we humans contain multitudes topic, a friend of mine who has written, I don't know, 5 books probably at this point. I feel like she is very well known for being a money person, but then also self-published a romance novel. Wow. And it's just fascinating to me to watch somebody who can just exhibit the fact that humans contain multitudes. Like she is not being pigeonholed into one thing that she has worked on. She's like, no, this is interesting to me now. So now I'm going to go play around here.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. I feel like going back to the very beginning of our conversation, I feel so disconnected from the personal finance world these days. Like because there are so many different people now that are in the personal finance space. And 2, I feel like I withdrew from a lot of personal finance stuff. Like, I mean, it's weird because I run a personal finance company, so it's like a little bit strange that I'm saying that. But I definitely withdrew from it because I was like, I don't like where this is going anymore.
No, I feel that way. No, I mean, I feel I've withdrawn a little bit. I mean, there's so many people that will pop up or people say, like, oh, do you know so-and-so? And I'm like, no. And part of it is because I'm not on TikTok and I'm not consuming information in that way. And there are a lot of people who have really exploded on TikTok, and that's kind of the only area where they're well known. And that's just not my area. But also, I, as somebody who has a brand called Broke Millennial, have had people be like, well, what about Gen Z? Like, they got their own people. And I don't mean that in a dismissive way. I mean that in a that's wonderful way. You should have people that can speak your language and talk to your lived experience. And, the perk of social media is it really has democratized access to a lot of information for the good and the bad, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And that, no, I was never going to pivot. I would love if Gen Z connects with the books. Great. I've had Gen Xers and Boomers reach out about connecting with the books. Wonderful. But I'm still going to talk to Millennials specifically. And I'm still going to reference things that to Gen Z make me seem ancient. And that's fine. I'm not for you then.
You remember when we were like the Millennials were like the young and hip
the hot
and cool
ones.
People. We were the hot ones there for a little bit.
It's true. Although at least our reign seems longer lived than Gen Z's is going to be, because people are already talking about Gen Alpha. And I'm like, sorry, guys.
I just heard of Gen Alpha like 2 days ago. And you're probably way more connected with stuff than I was. Like, dang, they've already come up with the...
Well, your child is Gen Alpha.
Yeah, I guess. But like, I just look at him like he doesn't know anything. I don't know. It's just weird. I'm curious how their generation is going to be different from Gen Z. Because I actually don't think that Gen Z is like, do you feel like Gen Z is a lot different than Millennials? Outside of just being younger and like cooler?
There are definitely certain things. Okay, here's an example. I was like old curmudgeon-y rage texting a friend of mine about this interaction the other day, that Gen Z's version of what is socially acceptable and our version of what is socially acceptable do diverge.
Okay.
One said example, I walked in to a business that has a receptionist where I was then gonna get, I was getting a wax. And so I'm obviously going to go back into a room.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just one receptionist up at the front. I walk in, she checks me in. She has AirPods in, which I don't love interacting, like
It's a little
take
weird.
it out and talk to me, which
That
was
sounds
strike
old.
one.
That sounds old. The way you said that sounds like something an old person would say.
But I have AirPods in when I'm walking my dog. And if someone talks to me, I take it out to acknowledge that like I'm listening to you.
Right.
But yes, it is an old person thing.
Yeah.
So then she puts it back in. Oh, actually, she puts them away because the next part wouldn't make sense if she had AirPods in, because she was FaceTiming someone speaking at full volume and that person was on speaker.
Oh.
And they are not talking about things that I felt were socially appropriate for the setting. Where I'm like, I have those conversations with friends, not at my job on full volume for people to hear. And that to me was a little bit jarring.
Yes.
And
That's
I
weird.
also I dislike, as somebody who, I'm not getting in my car and going places. I'm on the subway, I'm walking around on the streets, going on the bus. I hate when people are having FaceTime calls in public.
Yeah, I'm not a fan
at full volume compared to just like being on the phone or having your AirPods in or whatever. I also just don't like being in the background of people's phone calls,
Yeah,
which is a
strange.
personal thing. It just feels weird.
Yeah, no, that is very, very strange. What do you think for the Gen Zers? Like, if you had to pull out your Bloomberg prediction hat, what is going to be? I feel like for millennials for a long time it was like student loans and now like housing and us going through 2008. Like, what's gonna be the biggest struggle for the Gen Zers?
That's a great question because they are actually likely to benefit from the housing market in a way that we never did because boomers will die.
Yeah.
Who are in single family homes.
Right.
So I think I feel like for them, it's going to be the over access to information and the isolation seems to be way worse for them than it was for us, because I don't believe that using social media to connect to friends or just FaceTiming and not going and hanging out in person, I don't find those to be the same. You don't get the same interaction. And also, even if you see a group of them together, they're always just all on their phones.
Yeah.
Together. And that, to me, I feel like we're going to see a mental health crisis in a way that is different from what millennials experienced.
Yeah.
I also think younger Gen Z is going to have to reckon with the fact that their whole lives have been on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. We had a little bit of time without it. Like just
not only that we had time without it, it's that our parents weren't putting our baby pictures on the internet. Mm-hmm. We weren't posting. I mean, I guess the youngest of millennials could have been like 12, 13 posting things, but I'm in the middle of the generation. I got Facebook as a senior in high school.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine if I had been in middle school and was like uploading every little thing. Yikes. And like all of that is indexed to my name now.
Yeah. That is an interesting thing. I feel like I've got nieces and nephews, and I feel like they live inside of their computer world or like internet world more than we probably did. Like, I know that there's like a plenty of like, people that are into video games and stuff like that, but like they have like different lives. Like they have like a different person or like an alter ego or something that's like just lives in the internet and like these, weird games that they play and stuff. So I wonder how that's going to manifest itself as they have to go out into the world and like get jobs and stuff.
Or maybe they won't have to. Like, is the world going to change to such a degree that like we are just being mostly isolated in our homes?
Oh, that's
and
a scary
working
thought.
remotely. Like, and it is. I mean, it is a scary thought.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Every generation feels like we're the last generation that will have experienced X.
Yeah.
But we might be the last generation that experienced a childhood that was like very tactile and of the world and not very much combined with being raised with screens.
Yeah, I think that's scary. I have one other question just kind of related to that for you, because I think you'll have a much different perspective on this than I will. I feel like so they went through the pandemic and they saw the government reaction to the pandemic and how that has shaped. I don't know if they care about like inflation and what's happened now. Do you think that they'll have a positive view of the government? And do you think they'll be more likely to push for like social safety nets like you talked about, or will they be more like not suspicious of the government, but like see some dysfunction?
Are we talking Gen Z or Gen Alpha?
Gen Z.
So, as my AP US history teacher said when I was a junior in high school, everyone's a Democrat until they pay taxes.
Right.
And I do think it's really easy to be incredibly idealistic when you're young. And then you go through experiencing certain things, and it can radicalize people kind of in one of two directions. But I feel like the big difference, even in the last 7 years, is how angry everyone seems to be with each other and not listening to each other, and how just what I consider to be minority extremes of two diametrically opposed end of the spectrum are having the loudest voices in the room.
Yeah.
I do genuinely believe that a significant majority of Americans are moderate, that they are able to see both sides of things, that they are able to have reasonable, rational conversations about things, that even if they don't fully agree with one major issue, they are able to understand why someone else has a different viewpoint, or they're just kind of moderate on the issue in general. I think most of us have maybe one or two policies that were like, these are the most important things to us.
Yeah.
But those aren't the people that seem to have the microphones. And I'm not even talking about presidential nominees. I'm just talking about like people on social media who are pundits on news. And I think social media has helped create this divide in a really intense way and made it seem like everyone else is constantly screaming and yelling either about the thing that you agree with on an extreme, or you're getting served the other side in order to kind of like further entrench you in your viewpoint. And I do think Gen Z, I worry that maybe they'll end up apathetic, because it feels like whoever gets voted in, nothing seems to really change for the majority of the country. In fact, things seem to just get worse for a lot of people, regardless of whether, quote unquote, your guy is in or not.
Yeah.
And that it feels like it's gotten more about like your side winning and not about evaluating, is this person still doing good for a majority of people?
Yeah. So basically, it sounds like you're saying kind of like they're going to be apathetic and maybe more polarized.
I do worry about the polarization a lot.
Yeah,
and
I do too.
I don't know. Like I did not grow up for so much of my childhood in the United States. And what's hard for me to watch, and maybe I would have a different view if I was living outside, kind of looking in again, but I didn't live in this country when 9/11 happened. I lived in Japan. And it was a full school year. So that happened in September. I didn't come back to the United States until June of 2001. And I remember within 48 hours getting off of the plane and being like, oh, it's different here.
Yeah.
And the thing, though, that was that felt really different, though it did feel like everyone was together for a short period of time.
Yeah.
There was an outside force that was the problem. And I have said for years that like sometimes it makes me very anxious that is it going to take an outside force for us to then come together as a nation? But the pandemic was to a degree an outside force. It was a virus that was spreading that we couldn't see. We didn't know what was happening. It was very scary for everyone. And it just polarized us. Like we were united for like a week and a half.
Yeah.
And then it got really political and polarized. So I don't even know. I don't know. It makes me sad. I'm not completely doom and gloom about it. I try to be optimistic. I'm like, maybe Gen Alpha will be the saving force. But
I hope so.
I just wish more people would talk to each other and have conversations with people whose opinions are different than theirs. Like that is my big ask of people. I live in a very liberal bubble. But I'm related to a lot of people who do not live in a liberal bubble and do not have the same opinions I do and are willing to have interesting and not yelling conversations.
Yeah, I totally agree. That was one of the reasons I wanted to do longer format podcasts, like I said, because I want to get into more of this. This is one of my favorite conversations, and I love talking to you. This is like, it's always been one of my favorite things. I'm very glad that we met many years ago and we've become friends. I feel bad we haven't talked a lot since, but I feel like we're going to more now. Right? Hopefully, maybe.
I agree.
I'll have you on again too, because I do want to. We touched on a lot of different things. Like, there's a lot of there's actually a lot of like gender in the workforce things that I'd like to talk about with you, because I feel like it would be a really great conversation and very like illuminating for me, because I'm realizing
political football.
Yeah. But I feel like as I've hired people, and I was never exposed to that before. And we don't have time to go off on this tangent, but like those are things like seeing the fears and struggles of women in the workforce was not something that I ever had to witness or have been exposed to until I started hiring women. And then I was like, oh, there are things that they think about that I've never thought about before, because like for real reasons. So anyway, I think next time, if I can get you back on, I'd love to dive into that topic if you're down.
Well, and also I think just briefly, what to me is really interesting is that a lot of your workforce experience was working in an environment that tends to be dominated by women on the lower end and dominated by men in the upper ends of the hierarchy. So the fact that a lot of teachers tend to be women, but a lot of principals and superintendents tend to be men. And that in of itself, I feel like encapsulates a lot of the conversation, and we can have a longer conversation at another time. But like, it is fascinating to me. I'm like, but why up higher in the hierarchy does it not look like representative of the workforce itself?
Right. Yeah, that is very interesting. I would love to talk about that, but we're going to run out of time. So thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. We will book another one. I'm brokemillennial.com. People can find you there, but Bloomberg also.
All the books are available wherever books are sold. Please support your local bookstores. Also, if it's not in your budget right now to buy a book, or it's not spatially convenient for your home, I get it. Libraries. And if it's not your library, request it.
Boom. There you go. So just request all three of the books and the workbook, and hopefully your library can hook it up. So thank you so much, Erin, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.